Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming here bright and early. Thanks to the Cambridge Forum for honouring me with this invitation. And what I'm going to do in I think I still have 20 minutes, although we're starting late. The next 20 minutes is not to offer any prophecies or prognostications about whether any of the existential risks which humanity is avowedly facing at the moment might be likely or unlikely, impossible, inevitable. I'm not a scientist, it's not my place to offer a percentage, but at least to acknowledge that they are acknowledged by industry leaders themselves, and then to suggest some ways in which Muslim thinkers have tried to field all of these googly balls that have been bowled in the direction of the batsmen of the world's religions, and we're struggling to cope, but there are some interesting responses. So, Thriving Amidst Existential Risks is the title, and I want to start by reflecting on the fact that this is not just an area which makes believers uneasy, a sign of Antichrist, of the madness of the breakneck human rush into perdition as a result of materialism, hypercapitalism, and general forgetfulness of things spiritual. But there's an internal Western narrative as well, and these are two voices which are as good as any coming from a Christian perspective. This morning I'll be speaking primarily from a Muslim theological perspective, but there's a very interesting work being done on AI and existential threats from the perspective of Christian and other theologies as well. So there you go. Dostoevsky, well over 100 years ago, is already gloomy, linking it very much to the Nietzschean idea of the death of God. Things will never be the same again. We are alone in a heartless universe and simply have gadgets to play with. From the annihilation of God, this is the next stage in our story, to the transformation of the earth. Climate change might not have surprised him, and of man physically. Transhumanism, could he have imagined that? Probably not, but that's looming. And then T.S. Eliot, after his conversion to Christianity, also pretty pessimistic about the prospects of a materialistic, product-addicted, gadget-obsessed humanity for survival in the longer term. So this is not just a Muslim bee in the bonnet, but there's a widespread melancholia. Here's an atheist voice, Adorno, one of the Frankfurt School late Marxists, reflecting on the decline of the tactile and experienced environment, which is something that religionists are also concerned about. His idea is that as we move away from the habitat for which the brain is designed, forests in the Upper Paleolithic, and move into the machine age, the brain cannot function properly because it is surrounded by stimuli and phenomena which are alien to that world for which it was designed. He's reflecting on the modern melancholia and general sense that humanity is in the grip of entropic forces. So here he's talking about the loss of the tactile. There are no more casement windows to open, but only sliding frames to shove. No gentle latches, but turnable handles. No forecourt nor doorstep before the street, no wall around the garden. The movements machines demand of their users already have the violent, hard-hitting, unresting jerkiness of fascist maltreatment. He's writing after the Second World War, when many Western thinkers were considering the fascistic and the communistic materialist use of technique and technology to dominate the world, their own populations and other populations as well, as a sign of where technology is necessarily leading us. It's a decline in the qualitative as we move away from our putative, happy lives in those ancient forests. So this pessimism continues. That's Alberich, one of the villains in Wagner's Ring cycle. Wagner also reflecting on our modernity and the consequence of the shift into the machine age. Alberich is the one who forges the ring of power. And of course, it's an image of how modernity, in its twisted, non-spiritual, greedy way, creates technology. And his great slogan is, the master of the ring, and that the ring becomes its master. In other words, the technology, as it progresses and gains in power, pushes out the human until only the technological remains. And there you have Adorno again. The indefatigable self-destructiveness of enlightenment. So the point is not just a religious issue, that one is anxious about the consequences of the technologizing of our world. Plenty of Christian secular thinkers as well have shared these misgivings. So let's move on, fast forward to worlds that certainly Dostoevsky, Wagner, and those other doom merchants could not have imagined. Now we're looking at the prospect of an accelerated shift, not any longer from the biotic into the machine age, but now from the machine age into a cybernetic environment. Something, again, completely new, which presumptively takes us even further from the space for which our brains are adapted. To what extent can the mind provide the neuroplasticity which allows it to deal happily with an environment that is completely alien and foreign to itself? Answer, nobody knows. But this is Jeff Hinton, the father of AI, who abandoned Google famously a few months ago because he wasn't sure about the way things are going. Got the Nobel Prize last year, and he thinks maybe there's a 20% risk that the machines will just wipe us all out. And he quotes Alan Turing, who many years ago thought that the same thing was inevitable. So we have Hinton saying, I don't know of any solution to stop these things taking over from us. How do we stop these things acquiring forms of alien intelligence or something that looks like intelligence and still aligning its goals with human goals? How can we build that into the system? He doesn't know. Nobody really knows. And various other alarmist statements have come out of other industry leaders. Sam Altman, Joshua Bengio, Nick Bostrom over in Oxford, who thinks it may even be 50% risk. He has the idea that there are certain technologies which annihilate us once they are invented. And this has become a common currency of the current stage in the evolution of Western melancholia about technology. Some people, of course, think this is good because this is just the next stage in evolution. We are giving way to something that is better than ourselves, just as the Neanderthals gave way to us. And there are thinkers who think that we should be at ease with this latest episode in the natural progress of consciousness towards higher and higher forms. I don't propose to dwell much on that, but certainly what everybody knows is that there is an element of gambling that is behind all of these existential risks. That itself might be enough to make religionists a bit anxious. You can tell this is AI. If you count the number of left hands on the table, it's a giveaway. But the idea is that it's such an intoxication when you turn the workbench into a roulette wheel, playing for the highest imaginable stakes, that nobody wants to go home in the evening. What is at stake? Eternal life? Maybe. We heard Xi and Putin talking about that yesterday. The microphones picked them up. They're in their 70s. Who doesn't want that? Well, a few of us. That's a big stake. Torrents of inconceivable wealth, that's already happening. The possibility of irresistible new autonomous weaponry, that's starting to happen in Ukraine. The Chinese may not be working on it. We don't know, but it's likely to happen. The possibility of curing all diseases. The possibility of designing something that we don't understand that decides to press the off switch or designs some new pathogen that wipes us all out. All of these are possibilities. So the excitement of the workbench when you're gambling with unprecedentedly high stakes is something that seems to create a kind of euphoria in the industry, which religion is also going to be doubtful about. So here is our very own Martin Rees, professor here in Cambridge, a churchgoer, and also the astronomer royal, who has this book, again in this pessimistic vein, Our Final Century. He thinks there's a 50-50 chance that we will last to the end of the 21st century. The book is arranged in chapters, the different sorts of anthropogenic risks that cumulatively are likely to wipe us out. So he's talking about something that his generation and mine grew up with, the prospect of the Dr. Strangelove scenario and a nuclear war. And he thinks probably, looking at those who lived through the time and were with the Kennedy team at the time of Cuba, actually we're pretty lucky that we weren't wiped out. It's not Russian roulette, because it wasn't 1 in 6. He thinks it was probably evens that the Great War would have taken place. So Other threats that are familiar and that are mentioned in Rees's book, nanotechnology may or may not be a threat. Robots too small to see, even at the molecular level, that replicate themselves. How do we stop them replicating themselves? These are debates many of you will be familiar with, acknowledged as some kind of risk. Biosecurity, the malignant engineering of new pathogens that are unstoppable, already quite possible, already being done on a theoretical level, and no doubt in the darker recesses of ministries of defense around the world being actively pursued, if only with a view to figuring out whether they could ever be stopped. So here is the Mid-Journey bot, providing a picturesque image of Cambridge in the year 2075 as a result of the next existential threat, which is climate change. Maybe the bot has a sense of humor. Everything there except the camels. That's on median predictions of climate change and global heating. That's what King's Parade will be like. There's no students sunbathing, but perhaps they're all dead by this time. Don't know. I don't really know what the bot was thinking. But actually, those who are specialized in the new anxiety and depression phenomena in our society, particularly amongst the young, list climate change even ahead of AI non-alignment as the principal cause of mental illness amongst the new generation. And there is the same speculation about the sad end of the Wren Library in Cambridge as the temperatures heat up. So here's some more. Rees's point is that there's an accumulation of technically induced risks. The biopause, a term I like to use for the fact that not only are we bringing to an end the habitats of many other species on the planet, but we are also threatening our own reproductive health and fertility because the birth rate is tanking. 1.41 babies per British mother now, which is way below the replacement rate. And sometimes there are social, attitudinal issues, economic issues, but it's also the case that fertility is declining. The sperm rate in the developed world goes down by 1% every year. It's 50% of what it was in the 1970s, and there's no indication that that decline will come to an end. And then also attitudinal attitudes that people just don't particularly want to fit the extraordinary effort of child rearing into their busy, modern, economically productive lives. So that certainly has to be added to our list. So this came out on Sunday in the Times, alarming news about the levels of anxiety and depression in the teenage population in the UK. And those of us who work in universities will be well aware of this mental health pandemic that seems to afflict very many of the young. And the causes that are frequently given, which are often to do with technically induced anxieties. I think that's still online. I recommend reading that if you have a Times subscription. So now, part two of the talk, what are Muslim thinkers making of this? Do we stand a chance or are we all doomed? Well, I'm going to focus, the Muslim world is big and chaotic, on the European Western Muslim thinker tradition, partly because these thinkers come out of the belly of the beast, as it were. They're Westerners themselves. They have the philosophical, cultural understanding and training which gives them a particular perspective, and often coming out of the Western pessimism about the prospects for human flourishing and survival in an increasingly unnatural technical world. So here's one of my favorite founders of European Muslim theology, started work before the First World War, Leda Raffanelli, a poet, a publisher. She published the first complete works of Nietzsche in Italian. And she was the mistress for a while of the young Mussolini. In Mussolini's diaries, you can see he was really very attached and used to write her letters saying, let's go back to your flat and read the Quran and Nietzsche together. Interesting kind of relationship. Then they went their separate ways. They split up. And she attached herself to the Futurists. This was a group of particularly Italian thinkers and artists in the early 20th century who thought the past is dead, everything then was superstition, magic, religion, enchantment. The future is going to be technical, we need to embrace it. So he had a plan, for instance, for demolishing the city of Venice and replacing it with aircraft factories. He said, we can't be sentimental, we have to look to the future and embrace everything that is technological. And he wrote the famous Manifesto of Futurism, which attracted quite a few thinkers in this country at the time. They thought one should just be honest about the nature of our current environment rather than subscribe to the National Trust or whatever we nostalgic English do. The future is real. And then she splits up with Marinetti because she feels that this is an inadequate understanding of the Dionysian, biotic, emotional, poetic aspects of our humanity, which the machine age can't really cater for, but which have to be acknowledged. And so she forges a career for herself as a novelist and a poet and one of the early thinkers of Islam in Italy. And actually there's some other European Muslim thinkers who come out of Marinetti's group as well, somebody called Valentin de Saint-Poix, who is French, who ended up running an anti-colonial newspaper in Egypt, one of the key movers and shakers of Egyptian independence in the 1920s and 1930s, also disillusioned with this tech future vision that Marinetti was offering. So from that tradition come other thinkers, and there are plenty of others I could mention, but here are two fairly neat quotes. Pierre Klossowski, who converted to Islam quite young, I guess just after the Second World War, known as a novelist and philosopher. His novel Le Baphomet is now in English and is complicated, but quite a good, nuanced take on the implications of a post-God reality for modern Europe. Nietzsche is one of the characters in it. And he talks, as many of the others do, about traditional religious eschatologies, the decline of the world, the Turba Magna, the Antichrist, the end of time. So this is his summary of it. And he sees this as our age, the death of God, the destruction of the world, the dissolution of the person, disintegration of bodies, shifting function of language now expresses only intensities. Pretty gloomy stuff, but you can see how a lot of this ticks boxes with our wider 21st century set of anxieties about where things are moving. Then Charles Upton, who's still alive, still very active, has this book, The System of Antichrist. He's got some stuff on AI on YouTube, which you can check out. Only if we understand that God, not any human power, is Lord of the worlds and owner of the day of judgment, that he totally transcends this world while remaining immanent within it, can we face the human and transhuman evil of these latter days with courage, equanimity, and hope? That's going to be my kind of motto or the mood that I want to end with. Courage, equanimity, and hope in this extraordinary, breakneck, wild time of competitive searches for what may be the end of the species. Only religion will enable us to weather those storms. Religion generally, any religion, I think, being usually associated with positive mental health outcomes. Sometimes these people are worried about the implications of technology for the domination of the world by the West. Whoever has the better weapons controls the world. Here is an image from the Illustrated London News after Kitchener's successful campaign in the Sudan. The dervishes had only spears, and the Scottish regiment had Martini Henry rifles, and therefore British rule in the Sudan, and actually a quarter of the world, was assured because there was just no way of competing. And so one of the consequences of technology for these thinkers is the destruction of every civilization except that of the West. What is the response? Well, of course, the Dune franchise is still fresh in everybody's memory. Timothée Chalamet is the kind of mysterious prophet messiah. That plays into some of our anxieties about technology because the Dune world, unlike a lot of science fiction, posits a long-term future for humanity because humanity has fought a war, this jihad, against intelligent machines which are threatening to take over. Okay, so just to end with symptoms of our current malaise and anxiety, and taking the green pill, which is becoming more Islamically aware and authentic, not in a fundamentalist sense, but in a kind of classical sense. And some verses from the scriptures which indicate how religionists are likely to be less afflicted by these terrifying threats than others. The biopause, Muslims, you might say, There's still some things that Muslims know how to do, and the population crash has not really affected most Muslim countries as yet. It's a religious virtue to have children, to go forth and multiply, and that is likely to continue, and the biopause won't be a particular threat anytime soon in the Muslim world. The lack of meaning, our individualistic world of floating, free, choice-filled individuals who don't really know what they belong to or what it's all about. Certainly religion offers some powerful answers to that. Here you have some interesting scores. Pew Research just released their survey trying to figure out which are the most religious countries in the world. And the measure that they use is people who say that they pray every day. Top of the list, there's about 130 countries on the list, is Indonesia, followed by Nigeria. Of course, plenty of Christians as well in Nigeria, but generally the Muslim world is towards the top of this league table, and that is likely to be associated again with more optimism, positive mental health outcomes. Another symptom is our disconnect from nature. Remember what Adorno says about the limits of neuroplasticity. We can't go too far from the biological world for which our brains are adapted without there being a systemic breakdown. And the forms of the Islamic religion are shaped by the solar system, the prayer, the Muslim calendar, and you really have to have a normal human body in order to implement the religion. It's very hard to imagine a robot or some discarnate bot floating around in cyberspace actually practicing Islam. You have to have a body in order to pray, fast, and so forth. And then, of course, the widespread fear of artificial general intelligence suddenly turning off the switches and deciding that we're not necessary any longer. Here we have the tradition's skepticism about the possibility of a non-human intelligence. Of course, one might say the Turing test has already been passed, and it doesn't really matter if there's a consciousness at work analogous to what we understand as consciousness. It looks like it's conscious, and that's all that matters. But the soul is something that is breathed into the fetus by the angel while it's in its mother's womb, and that can't happen to a machine. So again, religionists are likely to push back against the idea that we're just one intelligence amongst others, and others might be better. And the Wojak is a famous internet meme, popular amongst incels and others, dysfunctional young men who are kind of so traumatized by the modern reality and so addicted to their phones and their screens that they can't function normally. Optimism is a feature of probably all religions. God will sort things out. Ultimately, there is a meaning. Ultimate reality is compassionate and just and will not allow total extermination. Now remember, when the Cold War was still a thing, studying in Egypt, my old Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad said, don't worry about a nuclear holocaust. It's God's business to bring an end to history. America and Russia won't do it. And that was his consolation. Optimism is part of religion. And then finally, this kind of lassitude that a lot of young people feel nowadays has no place in a religion that is absolutely about energy, about intention, about hard work, about engaging positively with the threats that are out there. So Cambridge Mosque, some of you are visiting this afternoon, looking forward to welcoming you there. Perhaps that's a sign of optimism. Using a lot of the latest technology, it's a very high-tech building with a lot of sustainability features to it, in order to show how technology can push back against some of the negative features of the Hesperocene. And hope you'll all be available to take part in that. So I think I'm just about done. Thank you very much. And stay in touch. Assalamu alaikum.